are in way over your multiple heads. You and this ship are going down. Over my dead body.
Welcome back, true believers and all you spectacular Spidey fans, to yet again another very exciting Marvel's Spider-Man 2 related video with another collab in place talking about some very exciting things pertaining to the game, but in this case, particularly revolving around the game's story. And for this video, I am joined by the one and only, the amazing Degenerate Jay, who, if you don't know, which you definitely should, covers anything and everything pertaining to amazing content in pop culture media, games, movies, comics, TV shows. Recently, he did cover a lot about DC fandom, and you're actually very close to reaching 100,000 subscribers, which I noticed, which is awesome. So huge congrats to you, and I'm very lucky to be able to do this one-of-a-kind video with you today. How you doing, Jay? What's going on?
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm doing good. Yeah, slowly crawling to 100K. It's been a pretty slow grind, but we are gonna get there, and I'm happy to be here.
And for today's video, everybody, we are going to dive a bit deeper into, obviously, Marvel's Spider-Man 2, a game that both Jay and I cannot wait for, but particularly with the game's narrative, confirmed by the creative director at Marvel Games, Bill Roseman, to be a bit darker, quote-unquote, than the previous games of Marvel's Spider-Man and Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales. However, we're going to analyze exactly what this means in terms of what Jay and I want to see from this game in terms of handling its story based off that statement claiming that it is going to be darker than the previous Insomniac installments, which in my opinion, if you guys don't already, which you definitely should, this interpretation of Spider-Man is my all-time personal favorite version of the character outside of the comics because of how insanely different it is from anything we've seen before, and just how truthful and accurate they are to the character of Peter Parker, while also bringing in new elements to his character that we'd never necessarily have seen before, not only just with his relationship with Mary Jane, Miles Morales, of course, at the very end of the first game, which, spoilers I guess in this case, Aunt May was killed off. And if that wasn't already dark, they also showed Miles Morales' friend in his own game, the Tinkerer, die and sacrifice herself after realizing what she was doing was wrong to save everyone in Harlem. So already, there's a ton of intense story material that Insomniac have done in the previous games to truly give us super compelling narratives that do complete justice to each and every one of these characters. Not just Peter and Miles, but the entirety of the supporting cast. And knowing now that Marvel's Spider-Man 2 is going into a darker route, where it's already pretty much confirmed at this point that Venom is going to be one of, if not the main villains of the game, alongside of Kraven the Hunter, there's a lot of narrative implications there, possibly that they could take from the comic storyline of Kraven's Last Hunt, or they could do something similar to the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, where if it turns out that Harry Osborn is Venom instead of Eddie Brock, they could really lie into that friendship take and really hone in on the focus of Peter and Harry being huge best friends in the past and them having to diverge and fight each other by the time they come face to face as Spider-Man and Venom. But for Jay, you, in this case, what do you truly want Insomniac to do to fully dive deeper into the darker tone in comparison to the previous games, especially since Bill Roseman himself did say, and I know you're a big Star Wars fan, that if the first game, Marvel Spider-Man 1, was their initial Star Wars movie, Marvel Spider-Man 2, in this sense, is actually being looked at like Empire Strikes Back, which in my opinion is my personal favorite Star Wars movie of all time. So what is your thoughts on all this?
I just really want this to be handled, no, I'm not trying to throw this under the bus, but I really want Venom to be handled with more seriousness than he is in the movies here. And I guess that can kind of go for all the movies. Now, I'm the one person on planet Earth, I've said before, who does not absolutely hate Topher Grace as Venom. Like, I was okay with the Raimi Spider-Man 3 Venom. I thought it was rushed. But I still liked, some of the more serious aspects of that take on the character for the 5 minutes he's on screen. So when we got to the movies with Venom and now Let There Be Carnage, I was kind of hoping that we would be able to see a mixture between that seriousness and some lighthearted, but they've gone all in on lighthearted in the movie realm. So when it comes to Venom and the black suit and all of that, I just want it to be handled with maturity. There certainly is a time and place for, just fun, just Transformers Dark of the Moon or, something like that, where you're just sitting down and having a good time. But with this story, if they're actually going to take it in a darker direction, I want to see like some emotional aspects of the black suit. Like what's going on with this? Is this the black suit that is like feeding off of, Peter's adrenaline and his powers and stuff like that? Or how does this work? Is this going to, basically almost skip by the black suit right to Venom? Because how are we going to have them both in the same game? I don't really understand some of those things. Some of those are concerns I have. They're mild concerns because I really have liked how Insomniac has handled both of the previous Spider-Man games with the original and then Miles. I thought that they were done very well. Obviously, I have my nitpicks, but, that's with anything. I think that just for me, what I don't want is play as the black suit for a third of the game and then it's gone or something like that. I want to actually have time to experience that and to see what that's like before working that out of the narrative or moving it on to Venom or something like that. That's pretty much the biggest thing for me. You can't just throw the black suit in and then move him on and then you move back to normal cosmetics or normal gameplay mechanics immediately. I don't want this to feel like rushed movie Venom black suit or anything like what I've been seeing in other media that doesn't seem to know how to handle these storylines, especially when we're already looking at what will likely be a different origin for the character, which doesn't make it bad. It just means that it needs to be handled with extra unique care.
And to bring up about the black suit, what I find really interesting is that Brian Intar, the creative director of this game, has gone on record in several interviews, but the main one with Greg Miller is stating that he believes that the black suit story for Spider-Man is easily one of the best stories.
I think that something like that suit deserves its day in the spotlight. And I think just making it a unlockable suit wouldn't be doing it justice.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the best stories for Spider-Man.
Sure.
And I think that it's a complex story. I think that that story needs to be told in the way that Insomniac would tell it.
Hell yeah.
And also what that means and does to Peter Parker outside of the Spider-Man suit, which I find extremely compelling. And when I personally look for in terms of superhero stories, not just in movies, but also, of course, games, comics, TV shows, is really getting into the character's headspace about figuring out what they're thinking in that moment and how they're personally feeling about what they might be struggling with or dealing with in the moment, which is why I loved so many elements of Marvel's Spider-Man 1 is that you get those moments with talking to Aunt May, as well as Miles Morales and Mary Jane, and Otto Octavius mainly. The greatest connection that was set forth in the first game was because of Peter and Otto's chemistry with one another, which made it all the more emotional by the time you reach the end of the game and fight him as Spider-Man and he becomes Dr. Octopus completely. And then you see that scene where Peter is struggling to determine whether or not that he can still be redeemed, and this is his mentor that he's been with for years, and he sees him like a father figure, just like Uncle Ben was. And then obviously they had that huge falling out and that fight, and it brought tears to my eyes after I first played it all the way back in 2018. It was an amazing moment, and then after adding on to that, Aunt May dying because the Devil's Breath formula, really diving into those emotional stakes, and the narrative tension that was driven between Peter and Otto also cost the life of Aunt May in the end, and even Mary Jane was kind of distraught from that as well. And luckily Peter still has MJ in this story to really be like his source of light, someone that is there for him at the end of the day to make sure that he doesn't lose himself in his fight as Spider-Man, which I find super, super compelling. So what I'm totally hoping for, like what you brought up about the black suit, is don't let it just be there and then leave. Let it linger for the players to really try and figure out whether or not this is something that you want to use or don't want to use, or whether or not Peter himself might think that this is something that I need to be a better Spider-Man, or maybe something that I can use from time to time and just see it like as a little partial upgrade, but have that influence slowly take over Peter's personality with the symbiote impacting him in that negative way, but really show that story direction and have that tension build up more and more as Peter may go down a darker path, a path we have not seen in the first game and all the DLC chapters and even what Miles went through in his own game show us where Peter can go in terms of trying to be this hero who is now, I would say, by the time the game releases, maybe 10 plus years into his career, because in the first game he was been Spider-Man for 8 years, in Miles it's 9 years, so maybe by the time the sequel comes out another time jump could occur where he's been like this for over a decade, and the symbiote might give him the power that he needs to take out enemies in a way really ruthless, in just that once I take them out they'll be done for good, not killing them but just brutally injure them with how intense he'll likely be with it on, and just show that to Miles if he sees Peter with that on him, seeing like, whoa, Peter, what's going on? What are you doing? And just have that tension, again, slowly build up between the chemistry with all the characters in Peter's life, outside the suit and in the suit at the same time. One of my favorite versions of the Spider-Man story with the black suit is the Ultimate Comics version with Peter and Eddie's relationship as friends, but then they have that falling out, of course, once he figures out that he is Spider-Man and he kind of stole the suit from Eddie to use on his own terms, and of course he becomes a bit more selfish and a bit more self-indulged with what he's doing with the influence of the suit taking him over slowly without his knowledge. But of course then that kind of has the backlash of Eddie becoming Venom while using the suit to his own benefit to try and get back at Peter. And even though we are currently aware that Peter and Harry are great friends in this game's universe, we don't know exactly where it could go between the two of them by the time the sequel comes around.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, there are a lot of different ways you could take this story because of what they've done too with, you know, it's interesting to see Eddie Brock being teased in that goodbye card to Peter Parker for moving on from the Daily Bugle employment. I thought that was really interesting to see that. It's one of those things where it's almost a red herring. Like, it makes us wonder, well, is that going to happen or is it not? How are they going to handle it? Would it actually be better to separate this from Eddie Brock? I mean, I love Eddie Brock Venom. There has been a lot of weird stuff with Eddie Brock Venom over the years that has a lot of baggage to it for a lot of people. The Raimi movies, you know, the new movies with Tom Hardy that some people really enjoy, some people don't. The comics where every other year it seems like Eddie Brock has a different symbiote attached to him and Venom, like the original Venom symbiote, is on someone else. You know, there is a lot of stuff with the symbiote storylines that's very convoluted. And I do think that Insomniac has a good opportunity here to take it whatever direction they want, as long as it is told well. Yes, people like Eddie Brock. Yes, people want the storylines they're familiar with, right? But even Doc Ock, that was handled fairly uniquely. There have been these mentorship type relationships between Doc Ock and Peter in the comics or in other continuities, even the Raimi-verse for a short time. But generally, they're not characters that are super connected at the beginning. They become more connected during Ock's time as, you know, Dr. Octopus and Peter's time as Spider-Man, and then slowly their stories become interwoven through that. You know, Doc Ock being the character who in the comics was raised in a very abusive home and had a lot of baggage and problems, and Peter being the opposite of that, and how they handled those, you know, upbringings and even reaching things like Superior Spider-Man. And Insomniac was able to kind of cut through all of that baggage and pick out the pieces they wanted to make a unique story that drew off of certain things from the past, but also, like I said, was unique. It went its own direction and told a good, emotionally compelling story that made this universe unique. So I think from that standpoint, with them respecting the Black Suit storyline already and the symbiotes and Venom and all of this, and honestly probably creating the best version of Miles that I can think of. Maybe Spider-Verse is tied, but I kind of think that this version of Miles might be even better than the Into the Spider-Verse version in terms of compelling writing and storytelling and stuff like that. They're able to take these characters that are interesting in and of their own right, but might have some baggage and issues or complicated history at the very least, and make it their own. I will say the only time, I'm not going to sidetrack us here, the only time they did that I have not loved it is Mary Jane. I really, over time, have come to not like this Mary Jane. I started liking her a lot, but every time I play through the original Marvel Spider-Man, she annoys me a little more with her nagging. So what I do hope happens with this is I really do hope the Black Suit puts some kind of strain on their relationship that gets them to clear things up. Because they do have a little bit of a volatile back and forth relationship, even in the original game, with like constantly feeling like they almost have to people please each other and bend over backwards, both of them, where it's like, oh, if Mary Jane steps out of line in this way, Peter's going to be like, you put yourself in danger. But if Peter goes, to get pizza on his way to, because he's been fighting crime for 48 hours and gets there a minute late to somewhere Mary Jane broke into, it's like, why are you wasting time with pizza? It's like just a lot of bickering. And I kind of hope that the black suit, I don't know if anyone's really talked about this, but I hope that these personality changes cause a lot of that baggage to be dragged out into the open and resolved, because I really want to like these two together. And I think the acting is great from both characters. And I really hope that emotional tugging and the anger that usually comes with that suit kind of pushes these characters closer together by pulling them apart. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but that's something that I was kind of thinking of with this. It's something that I think Spider-Man 3 tried to do, did okay with, but with the narrative flexibility of a video game where you have many hours, I think that's something that could be explored a lot more in depth.
No, I totally agree, because based on everything that Brian Intihar described about how connected he is to this version of Peter Parker and how mature he is in the sense that he's been Spider-Man for 8 years, but he's still learning and going up against his classic foes that, of course, we see in the first game of Dr. Octopus, and Green Goblin doesn't even exist yet. Now we're actually finally seeing Venom with teases of Kraven the Hunter. There's a lot of build-up within this universe that can now be set forth within the story of the sequel, and implying that with the black suit and how much Brian Intihar cares about that particular story already gives me full confidence that the handling of it within the narrative is going to be outstanding. And definitely with what you mentioned of characters, the most interesting thing, which not a lot of people seem to recall, is Insomniac actually confirmed, seemingly a long time ago, all the way back in 2018, is that one of Spider-Man's most famous characters of Gwen Stacy might be alive in this game's universe. They answered a fan's question with a response pretty much saying, like, who said Gwen is dead in our universe? Like, question mark. So it's like, are they implying that not only is Gwen alive, but that Peter may have already come in contact with Gwen? Or another route is that maybe Peter doesn't even know who Gwen is yet, and they could introduce her within this game, only for them to kill her off by the end of the story if they somehow want to try and push Peter over the edge and then have him fully embrace the symbiote black suit, and then that involves Venom somehow down the line.
Are you telling me that there is a chance that they will kill off Mary Jane and bring in a really likable Gwen, kind of like how Emma Stone was in The Amazing Spider-Man? Because that was the glowing, that was the absolute cream of the crop for me. I mean, if we're saying Gwen might still be alive, who's to say that Peter actually ends up with MJ? Or who's to say that, even by the end of this storyline, that Peter will still be Spider-Man by the end of all his games? Maybe Miles, a younger, more vital Spider-Man, is going to slowly work his way over the course of these games to becoming the main Spider-Man of this universe. I think that's one of the coolest things about this is I understand in comics, and I've been guilty of this too, because a lot of times changes are made that are bad in storytelling. Look at the new Injustice movie, all the changes to that are just a big yikes. But, Insomniac has proven that when they make changes to the narrative, they can do a good job with it. And one of the things I really like about this universe is what you said. You don't know how everything's going to end up. What if Gwen's alive? Where's, Aunt May's gone now. That's pretty unprecedented in a lot of ways in the history of this character. They can do their own thing, and I think that's really, really cool.
And that's easily one of my favorite aspects about this, is that none of us are expecting what's to come. They could go any route, any way that they choose, and for all honesty, I definitely think that it's all for the better. Because it's nothing like we've seen in the movies, nothing we've seen in the previous games, nothing we've seen in the comics. It's its own unique thing, and that's why if they do make Harry Venom, or they kill off MJ, or maybe Rio Morales gets killed off by Venom, just like how she kind of does in the comics with Miles Morales' story, which is really dark, anything can happen, and that easily influences the way on how they can go the route of a darker tone story to truly give us a Spider-Man narrative that not only will be super compelling for all of us fans who have played the previous games, but just offer a tale of Spider-Man, or Spider-Men in this case with Peter and Miles, that can truly shape new and unique opportunities for the medium of storytelling with Spider-Man for years to come, which easily makes me, as a fan of this character and for this particular version of the character, gets me hyped beyond belief. So with all that said, everyone, that is our thoughts for Marvel's Spider-Man 2 and what we would like to see from its story being handled with a darker tone set in place. Let us know all your thoughts in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the video and the channel if you did enjoy, and definitely be sure to support Degenerate Jay as much as you can. Very close to 100k subscribers. Thank you so much, Dave, for joining me. I had a wonderful time.
Hey man, thanks for having me. And in closing thoughts, I just want to see that sweet romance return with Black Cat during the symbiote arc. I need my fix of Web of Shadows edginess, and I very much like her.
I ship Spider-Cat all the way, dude. It's time for the comeback in the sequel, or we riot, for sure. But anyways, guys, thank you all so much for watching. Stay spectacular, Spidey fans. Until next time, peace out.